Welcome everyone to the conversation we will be having today. We're very excited to be here at the Sea Film Center to discuss the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the film that I Am Denver put out. So I'm Emily Harvey. I am a person with a disability. I'm an amputee, and I'm also a civil rights attorney. And I'll turn it over to Damon.
Hello, I'm Damon McLeese. I'm the Executive Director of Access Gallery here in Denver, and we're thrilled to have this panel. We're going to start by having each panelist introduce themselves and answer the question. The I Am Denver film helped us highlight many of the ADA successes. Please introduce yourself and tell us one way the ADA made the biggest difference in your life or in the for our community. And I think we're going to go ahead and start with Julie.
Hi, my name is Julie Riskin. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, which is a statewide disability rights social justice organization. Cross disability means that we are run by and for people with all types of disabilities. And personally, as a wheelchair user, the biggest difference the ADA has made in my life is the ability to go places and transit and travel.
Thank you, Julie. Let's go ahead and go to Andre.
Hi, Andre Van Hall, and I'm blind. And 31 years ago, I was running hotels, and I ran some of the largest hotels. And when ADA came out, I was horrified and terrified at the cost and the difficulty of meeting their needs. Then I went suddenly blind, and I've learned to appreciate the enormous help that ADA is for all of us. And particularly for me, I love the buses that announce the next stops and allows me to know where I am and where I need to get off, and the apps that work with it and all the software that makes interacting with the world possible.
Well, thank you. How about Chelsea?
My name is Chelsea Lee. I work for the Denver Office of Sign Language Services. I am also deaf. And thanks to the ADA, it's provided access to our community. You know, I grew up with deaf parents with a number of barriers prior to the ADA, and I just thought that that was normal. And in fact, it wasn't, you know, and finding out that we had the right to have access to information, obviously as a deaf community, has been pivotal.
All right. And last but not least, my friend Stuart.
Thank you, sir. My name is Stuart Tucker-Lundy. I currently do a lot of consulting for the city and county of Denver, as well as other entities. And I also do producing. The ADA has affected my life so well that I didn't know that I needed it. I said that in the film, and I'll say it again. It has let me navigate through life in a way that I did not know that was possible, because I didn't know I needed it until I did. And then with my friend down here, Julie Riskin, she was one of the people that put it in front of my eyes very boldly that I needed it in the areas that I was lacking. So that's how the ADA has affected me.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Yes,
Go ahead, Emily.
Oh, thank you all for providing that insight into how the ADA has impacted you in a positive way. Now let's talk about some shortcomings. So by no means did the ADA solve every problem for those living with a disability. What work specifically remains to be accomplished and why? And let's start with Chelsea.
Sure. So the ADA requires the provision of access for people with disabilities. One example for deaf people is the ADA requires the provision of interpreting services or captioning. Unfortunately, a number of companies and businesses, physicians still balk at the idea of paying for those accessibility services, and that can be a real frustration, and it all comes down to cost. It's a large issue even yet to this day, and I'm sure a number of people with a variety of disabilities have faced that reaction, you know, thinking, oh, it costs too much money, it's a burden, and so that is definitely problematic.
Thank you. I've definitely heard of that being an issue. Thank you, Chelsea. This is Emily again. And now let's go to Julie.
Thanks. There's a number of things. One thing it was mentioned in the film is that there are not accessibility standards in the ADA for websites. We are in the process right now of putting something in Colorado state law to require digital accessibility, at least for state and local government. That's a bill that's going through the State House right now, but that's something that is not, again, the ADA says everything has to be accessible, but then there's been a lot of ambiguity about digital accessibility and what, if there isn't a place, what does that mean? Another thing that I think is a shortcoming is we need more lawyers. We need provision of lawyers because it's a law, and to enforce a law, you do that through the judiciary, do that through courts. And people with disabilities have historically been impoverished and have lacked access to legal support. So that those are two things that come to mind immediately. Because there's too few lawyers that are able to represent people when there's a problem.
Thank you, Julie. Let's go to Andre.
Well, I have to go to Chicago, Milwaukee in 2 weeks, and I'm going to be honest. I am a bit scared being blind and having to be at Union Station in Chicago that I'm not familiar with. And yesterday I was trying to purchase the rail ticket online. It was extremely hard to do, and now I find out I have to go to a machine at the station. I have to scan the barcode to get a ticket. Then I have to find a platform. And in the airports, we got people to escort us and take us to our gates. But places like rail stations, whatever, that I think are very terrifying, just because of the kind of people there are. There's all kinds of people walking around. So I don't think we're anywhere close in full accessibility for people that are visually impaired in public places like train stations.
Thank you. And Stuart, can you tell us what work you believe specifically remains to be accomplished and why?
Yes. Since the pandemic, I am starting to see a lot of shortcomings, not pertaining with my own disability, but with others. I'm starting to see literally where my brothers and sisters who have visual impairments or hearing impairments, and me working from home now, I'm starting to see where that accessibility is not in our technology, and we have a ways to go with that. So that's where I'm starting to see a big shortcoming on technology.
One of the things that was raised for me as I was hearing other people talk is the fact that people with disabilities are still largely very poor and unemployed. And I thought of that. I mean, the issue of getting through a train station when you're blind, there's this really cool thing, but it's super expensive, called Iris, where you put on glasses, I guess, and you connect to someone and they tell you exactly what's in front of you and where to go and all of that, but it's like a per minute cost. So there's a lot of really cool technology that can help, but it's not accessible to most of us, people with disabilities out there. So I think
I'd love to respond to that. There's a new company called Be My Eyes.
Okay.
They've got 3.5 million volunteers around the world. And so I push the button, and within 30 seconds, I have a volunteer and I can hold up my phone, and then they can see through my phone and tell me, or
Wow.
go right or left, or what the sign says, or whatever. And that is free, completely free.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love that technology. I was helping someone last night with that. That is a great technology.
Yeah, so Andre, maybe you could talk a little bit more about what it's like for you when you go into a new environment for the first time, such as when you're traveling. Maybe take our viewers into kind of that experience so they can understand it a little better.
Sure. And it's interesting when I fly quite a bit. I'm a speaker, motivational speaker, and so I travel the country speaking. And so at airports, I ask for escorts, and I see a little bit. I can see shapes and light, and so again, blindness is all a matter of degrees. And but to me, trying to find, for instance, the Uber. And like at Detroit Airport, the Uber, you literally have to go through the airport, up an escalator, over a bridge, down an escalator. And with a guide dog, I can't do that. And so I have to, because the guide dog cannot go on an escalator because of the risk for the pads and the paws. So we have to find the elevators, and then you have to go through a parking lot, and that's dangerous walking through a parking lot when you're blind. And there's quiet cars now, electric cars, etc. And you're not familiar with the area. You're lugging a suitcase, you have a guide dog, you've got a backpack, and try to find stuff. So it's something that's extremely disorienting and difficult to navigate spaces. And even though there's different things if you have a cane or a guide dog. I tried to summarize very briefly.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you. Can you, I don't want to focus too much on this question, but can you tell us a little bit more? You made a comment about using a cane versus a guide dog. Can you explain how that impacts how you navigate?
Sure. You know, we say that we use our cane to find obstacles, and we use our dogs to avoid them. And I think it's a very quick way of summarizing it. But
I
so
love it.
if there are people that are born blind, whatever, and they can navigate with the cane like it's nobody else's business. They're awesome. I can't. I went blind when I was late in my 50s, and I've learned to use a cane. So a guide dog. Also, the difference is, let's say I am speaking at a conference, I'm in a ballroom with a cane, and nobody knows how to handle me. They may avoid me, or they'll speak loud or whatever, but I got a guide dog, and everybody flocks immediately, wants to interact with the dog. So I think that the dog is not only a huge help from the guiding perspective, but also from the getting connected to the people around you, because you don't see them, they need to see you.
And before we move to the next question, can I just ask one more question to the full panel? And that is, Andres talked about his experiences with travel and new environments. Have you all of the other panelists faced similar issues? And we'll start with Stuart.
Yeah, actually, the first time I ever traveled, I did it by myself because nobody said not to travel or get on a plane. So I got on a plane and went to Miami by myself. I realized that I like talking, but I realized I have to talk a lot to explain to someone how not to hurt me. So that is the case when I travel. How to get on a aisle seat, how to be transferred properly so they won't hurt me, not to be dropped. Wondering where my wheelchair is going to be, and if it's going to be intact when I get on the other side of my trip. So I can arrive safely, but my ride, once I get to my destination, is screwed, and an Uber will not help. So that's been one of the challenges of traveling, at least by yourself. Now that I'm married, my wife and I do it, but she is my eyes, if you will, because I've had many years of traveling by myself. I leave it to her to talk to the middleman. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Julie, did you want to add anything to that? Okay. Chelsea, would you like to add anything?
Sure. As a deaf person, I rely on visual means, be it captions or signage in the lived environment. So for example, at the airport, finding the terminal number, oftentimes there are auditory announcements that aren't accessible. They'll announce, a gate change or a flight delay, and we won't know until we go and actually see a visual board, or we'll get to the gate. And oftentimes I'll go up to the counter and say, I'm deaf. If there's a gate change or a delay, please, go out of your way to let me know. But I have to assert myself in those means. It doesn't come to me easily if there's not a visual means that's accessible. So that can be frustrating. And that's the things that is fairly common and often causes miscommunications. Sometimes on public transportation, for instance, when you get onto a bus or on the subway, there are auditory announcements, the next stop is XYZ, and I have to look outside at the signage at the stop to realize, oh, we're at my stop, because it's been announced, but only auditorily, or have an app. But some of those auditory announcements that aren't made visual have been, problematic. Some places are more accessible than others.
Well, thank you. That was all very insightful.
All right. So why don't we shift gears a little bit and talk about something that's a little bit near and dear to my heart, the issue of affordable and accessible housing. Affordable housing is becoming a very rare thing in Denver, and the idea, if you add in any concept of accessibility, I think we're really for our community, that's a very, very challenging thing. I read a statistic once that less than 1% of all housing units in this country, or less than 5%, are accessible. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about issues around housing, both in terms of affordability and in terms of accessibility. And why don't we start with Stuart this time?
Yeah, this is Stuart Turcolindy again. I hate moving to begin with. So, I mean, that task right there, I think I'd rather lose a limb or something like that to not have to move again. But when you have to do it, first there is it's not like Zillow. You just don't go to a website and get an affordable house. You have to pick it out as far as the accessibility. That sometimes can be a chore because it may not have a shower where I can take a shower, a rolling shower. It may only have 2 units that have accessible units, but one of those may be occupied by somebody who is able-bodied. As far as affordability, downtown Denver, you may want to take a second mortgage out to pay for an apartment down here. So it's very expensive down here. We are okay, but that's only because we are a we, and there is multiple incomes here. But I'm fortunate in that vein. There's not a lot of individuals. There are individuals who only have one income, and that have to decide, okay, just like everybody else in America in certain pockets, do I pay for rent this month, or do I cut back a little bit and pay for this bus pass that I may need? So it's about options and balancing things, which everybody has to do, but it seems like it's a lot harder for a person with a disability in my condition and maybe in somebody else's condition who looks like me.
Thank you.
I've lost a limb, and I would rather have lost the limb than move again. So I'm with
There
you,
you
Stuart.
go. There you go.
Yeah, this is Damon again. Julie, I'd love to hear your perspective on the housing market, not only in Denver, but just more in general.
Affordability. There are also a lot of issues with habitability. Again, I think this really ties to me to the intersection between poverty and disability, which is too strong. There are as much of a problem as access is. There are ways around that. There is funding sources. There are in most communities, not all, but most. There are ways around it, but the affordability issue is such a barrier, and there's so little affordable housing, particularly for people on low income, any fixed income, but particularly very low incomes or no income. Our newly disabled brothers and sisters are often totally left out because they don't have any income, because they're still battling that process. They might have lost their job and they don't have a disability yet, like disability payment yet. We just don't have enough subsidized housing, and we also don't have a path to go from subsidized housing to non-subsidized if someone's lucky enough to get a job, and to try and get out of poverty. So we trap people in poverty, then we don't help people get out. And one thing that's important to know is in Denver, almost 60% of the quote unquote chronically homeless, and I hate that, it makes people sound like a disease, but people who have experienced homelessness for more than a year are all people with disabilities. So we need to look at the situation with homelessness as a disability issue.
Thank you. Yeah, I second that. We see that quite a bit. A big part of what we do is around employment and economic things, and it's just a catch-22 for a lot of people. If you earn a little bit too much, you lose your benefits, so you can't hold on to your affordable house, or it wasn't really affordable to begin with, and you're not going to be able to get a job. I know we're going to talk about employment here in a minute, but I wanted to give Chelsea an opportunity to speak about any housing issues or that might be pertinent.
Sure. Like Julie had mentioned, a number of homeless people, large percentage, have disabilities, and that is problematic in terms of outreach. as well as information referral to that population. Perhaps there are programs that have funding at the ready that are, in difficult English that aren't translated into American Sign Language, and so it's disregarded. The information that's presented to them may not be made accessible easy, so that the support that is available to perhaps find housing for them isn't actually accessible to them. So information is a real gap in terms of the deaf community having access that is at the ready and accessible to them.
Yeah, and that the concept of accessibility is just so broad and touches so many areas of what we all do. So thank you for that, Chelsea. Andre, as a former hotelier,
Right. So I got to take it from that perspective.
tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to take it from the short-term housing perspective, and yes, we were kicking and screaming into the accessible guest rooms. And then we started converting them or building them with new construction. And the problem is that, when you try to put the general public in them, they hate them because they think that they're in a hospital and they tell you, we don't want to be in this room. And when that's the last room left, and vice versa, when you go to a conference with people with disability or with disorder number, you never have enough of the rooms that you need. I think that technology has helped us. In the old days, we had to have devices that would flash lights if these fire alarms went off in the room because the people that couldn't hear. So and whatever. So, but nowadays, we the people with disability can carry devices that will make the room more accessible to our needs. But in the end, I think that just like at the beginning, we had a few non-smoking rooms, then we make the whole hotel non-smoking. And I think that just like now we have a few accessible rooms, I think that in the future, we're going to have to start to see of putting more and more accessible items in every single guest room in hotels. So that is my hope.
Yeah. And this is Damon again. I was thinking in terms of what you said about people not wanting to be in the rooms because they were like hospitals. And I'm like, I think that that's still part of the problem. So much of how the general public views disability is still through that medical model lens. And I really think we need to really change that. So thank you all. Any last minute thoughts about housing?
Just pivoting off of what Andre was saying and what you were saying, Damon, is that I think when people don't have that gut ableist reaction about disability equals bad, people actually love disability features. Again, I talked about this in the film. I mean, Zoom, those technologies were based off of stuff that was made for blind and deaf folks. Working at home used to be just like a disability thing. Now, I can tell you that every single, at least women, because that's my experience at DIA, like the women's room, the accessible restroom in the women's room. No one likes the other ones. So it's kind of funny that people will say that, but they actually love the features. I don't know. Did anyone in hotels ever it seems like people would like a larger bathroom and not like to be squeezed into a little tiny one, but when they feel like it's for disability, they then say they don't like it. And I think that's really kind of the subtle ableism that really permeates our society.
Yeah. And I really do believe a lot of that is just what you said, Julie. It is really just that holdover, that ableist idea that disability is somehow bad instead of it just being part of the natural human condition. And I think we do a lot of work in the design world, and we're trying to get young designers to think very differently about it, but we've got a ways to go. So, well, thank you all for that. Emily, you ready to go on?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get to a question that I'm going to let Julie answer first because she has already gone this direction a couple of times. So another tremendous issue facing people with disabilities is the high rate of unemployment, which Julie has mentioned. It hovers around 70%. So while the pandemic has made a lot of things more accessible, we have to be asking, how do our organizations and institutions work to maintain the current level of accessibility going forward? And what does that mean for getting people to work?
Thanks. Yeah, employment, I think, is the employment and effective communication are the next big frontiers we need to crack with the ADA. With employment, you know, obviously we've now figured out that people can work from home and the world doesn't end, doesn't fall apart, because everyone with the kind of job that allows you to do that has done it. Employers, I think, have realized that a lot of the rigid rules weren't really necessary and that we can do without them, and you know, in a whole bunch of ways that we can do things differently. So we've learned that. We keep saying, don't go back to normal. Normal was not equity. It didn't work. In terms of the unemployment, I think there's so much tied up in that. It's way bigger than accommodations at the workplace. Now, does that mean there aren't bad employers that won't provide accommodations? Sure, they exist out there, but there are lots of employers that actually do want to hire us. There's again, there's this whole complexity with benefits. The benefits that we have, a lot of people don't know about. In Colorado, you can, if you're right now between the ages of 16 and 65, you can have a job up to a very high income, like $100,000 a year, and buy into Medicaid. So it used to be that, well, if I don't have a job, I don't have anyone to pay for my wheelchair or my meds or whatever. That's not true in Colorado. The problem is for people that have intermittent disabilities, that maybe they can work a few months, then they're sick a few months or whatever, that Social Security is still an all or nothing program. And if you make money long enough, then you lose that. And so for someone that can't really sustain employment, that's still a barrier. But for decades, people with disabilities were told, you can't work, you can't work, you can't work. All these horrible things will happen. So just because we passed a law in Colorado that fixes one piece of it, it's not like you snap your fingers and everyone suddenly gains both confidence and skills. There's also a tie into our horrific education system for kids with disabilities. So a lot of kids with disabilities come out not able to problem solve, not able to read or write. And you know, in a way that an employer wants. So that's something else that has to be fixed, is that we have to have higher I think, quite frankly, higher standards for everyone, but particularly for kids with disabilities. They should be able to be accommodated and educated, and we shouldn't see those two things as separate. So there's a lot with employment, and it's also those of us who have the privilege of having a job, getting out and talking about it publicly to say, hey, it's okay, you can work, you don't lose all your supports. There are ways to manage benefits, and there are ways to get what you need. There are people who will help you get what you need from an employer, who can help you talk through accommodations, who can tell you what is and isn't reasonable, like what you can and can't ask for from your employer. And maybe if it's something that isn't reasonable, like, you know, I need help going to the bathroom in the middle of the day. Well, you don't ask your employer for that, but you can ask Medicaid for to be able to hire your own person to get that. So, but helping people navigate, because how is the average person supposed to know that? People don't know this stuff, and we don't do a good job of really telling people and supporting people, particularly in integrated jobs.
Yeah, I think you raised a lot of really good points. And one of the things that I thought about as you were talking about that and integrated employment is, you know, sheltered workshops and segregated employment, and trying to move forward with getting rid of those, because they're not really integrated opportunities for people with disabilities. So thank you, Julie. Let's go to Stuart.
Oh gosh, you know, it's funny because when I'm around Julie, she has a tendency to drop the mic, and I don't have anything to say anymore. So it's like, oh well, she said it all. But I have been gainfully employed, and it's scary because when you're gainfully employed, you're always thinking about, am I making too much money? Am I making too much money? I don't think that an able-bodied person will ever think of something like that, or have to go to your supervisor and say, can you bring back my, can you not pay me as much? How many, do you know how what's the word I'm looking for? Degrading that feels to go to your employer and say, I'm at a admin position and I can't take the pay because I will lose X, Y, and Z. That probably to me is probably one of the most humiliating things that has ever happened to me. So what Julie says, and I'm not going to dovetail on it because she dropped the mic on it. She is very true and very, very right about what she says. I mean, you have to worry about benefits. You have to worry, and I don't see that is the issue of negotiating. Why do I have to negotiate a system to get money? Why do I have to negotiate? I mean, why can't I just have it? If somebody, Warren Buffett doesn't negotiate his salary, Jeff Bezos doesn't negotiate his salary, or I mean, he owns everything. But I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't have. You get the point where my point is. They don't negotiate their salaries.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And maybe we can take a step back because we're all talking kind of this benefits and work and balancing that. And some of our viewers might not have the background to why that comes into play in the lives of people with disabilities. So Julie or Stuart, if either of you would like to respond to that, provide a little bit of background.
Sure. So again, people with disabilities forever were told, you know, you can't work. So and until 2015, even to get basic like Medicaid, like to be able to get out of bed in the morning or get basic things that you needed, you had to be on disability. You couldn't do it if you were earning money. You had to be on disability. And there have been like what they call work incentive programs, which is really a misnomer because we didn't need an incentive to work. We needed the bureaucracy to get out of our way. But there have been these programs that have just been impossible to use, very like Byzantine rules and really, really obscure. Over the years, but really until 2015, you know, it wasn't even a discussion, you know, 2014, 2015. We got the Medicaid buy-in program, and that's good for a certain segment of people. I mean, I think it's good for people who have enough of a stable disability or the ability to earn enough so that you don't have to work all the time. But it doesn't work for people who might not be able to keep a job a long time or might be on and off because it only works when you're employed. And so if you don't have, if your disability is such that you have cyclical issues, so that you might be able to work for 4 months and then not work for 3 months and then work again for 2 and not work for 6. And so you might have to have just differences in how you manage your employment or, you know, how you deal with it. And if you work for 9 months, you give up your Social Security. So you can't get it anymore. So we don't have, and again, it's an all or nothing. So if you can't totally support yourself, it's very hard to work when you can. And so that's what keeps people dependent on Social Security. And that's either SSI if you're very low income and don't have work experience. And that's, you know, you get less than $800 a month. You know, you can't live on that. But even SSDI, which is quote unquote the better benefit, is still not enough to pay rent in Denver for most people. So there are these, again, so people get trapped, you know, so you might be on SSI and you've gotten subsidized housing, let's say. So you have your subsidized housing, you have SSI, you have food stamps, you have Medicaid, and there isn't really a good path to climb out of that. Because the minute you make too much, then, okay, you're not on SSI, now you're not considered SSI eligible. It takes a lot of finesse to climb your way out of that. And quite frankly, a lot of very specialized knowledge. And to add salt to the wound, there's a ton of inaccurate information out there. So a lot of times people get bad information from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, and then they end up with overpayments, because if you don't get off Social Security when they think you should, you can end up with an overpayment. And most people who have gone back to work, even those who have tried really hard to report everything, get overpayments from Social. And they'll send you a letter that says, you owe us $10,000. Please, you know, send a check or credit card by Friday. And there are ways out of that and to deal with it, but the average person doesn't know that. So everyone's heard a horror story. Everyone knows a horror story. A lot of people's families say, don't risk it. Don't risk your benefits. It was so hard to get on. Don't try and do anything to mess them up. And you get that when you get on a benefit, you get these very scary letters that says you must report immediately if you earn any money, if anything changes. And I think people just get really scared, and it'll say stuff like under penalty of perjury. And if we find out you got something you didn't report, you could go to jail. And people get very scared for good reason.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your point of needing more lawyers. I think that highlights that really well. All right, let's go to Andre, back to the more broad question about accessibility and employment, and how do we maintain that moving forward, and what does that mean for
Yeah.
disabilities.
And again, I look at it from a matter of perception. And so, and again, going back to my industry, but I don't know, some 28 years ago or so, I was managing a large chain hotel. And my catering team came to see me and they said, hey, we want to wear pantsuits, and the dress code says we have to wear dresses, skirts, and hose. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. My wife has been wearing pantsuits. Okay, whatever. And call corporate and I'll have it changed. And corporate said absolutely no way. And it's a laziness and also being a little bit of being scared. You reach a person on a level in HR that says, I don't want to fight this battle. I don't want to go up the chain of command with this. And I think it's the same when you talk about people with disabilities, that I think that there is a perception that it's going to bring the image down, that it's not what the public wants to see. And therefore, there is significant pushback about hiring people that are different than we are. And, again, an example, I speak on change. That is what I do, and how we resist change. And, Apple has been hiring people with purple hair and piercing and tattoos, or people in wheelchairs. And I was helped by a blind person the other day when I was at a store a few months ago. And I think Apple is so progressive in their way of thinking, but we still have that image that person with tattoos and colored hair and piercings is not representative of what we want. And it goes back to then people with disabilities, right? So we need to help people learn that change is here, and that embracing it and being ahead of it is a lot easier than fighting it. And spending all that energy fighting something that is going to come, it's going to have to be done. So it's a change of mindset, I think, that has to take place.
No, I think that's really important. And your comment about tattoos relating to disabilities, my prosthetic leg is very colorful and sparkly, and I often have people mistake it for a leg sleeve tattoo as opposed to a prosthesis. So that's what I thought of when you were telling that story. All right, last but not least for this question, Chelsea.
Yeah, I think for me, I would really reiterate what everyone else has said. I know Social Security is something where deaf people typically try to give up on that. They'll say, I don't need to buy it. I don't need to get a job because I'm in the system already. Giving up that would be really difficult. So I've seen a lot of my friends in very similar situations to what you have mentioned already. But I know one thing, just in general, there are many jobs that are actually for deaf people, working with deaf children. And often you see hearing people actually take those jobs, whereas they should be left for people, that are deaf, or working in schools for the deaf should be employed by deaf people. But hearing people typically take those jobs. And then what is left for deaf people? What options are we left with? So I think giving us space to work with our own community, with our own people, is so important. And we can be lawyers. We can do so many other things as well. It doesn't only have to be within that spectrum of deaf community, but so much more.
Well, thank you. I really, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, if I could dovetail off of something, it's Stuart Turkalundy again. If I could dovetail off of something Chelsea said, being amongst your own is not saying that, we are some type of separatist or something like that. But that kind of goes in the same thing with the Black community. I was listening to a podcast a few days ago, and it touched on the base of going to see a doctor of your same nationality, a Black doctor in a Black community, because a Black man knows the challenges that I may go through as far as having hypertension. I may have a diabetes. So he or she may recognize that more and can communicate more better than a white doctor or a doctor of a different color. The same is true with persons with disabilities. No one knows a person with a disability better than another person with disability. Now, like I said, I'm not trying to separate things, but you might want to get those people in first and then bring in the other folks later so they can learn from you.
I think that's really important. And I think, part of it goes to empathy and, really having an understanding. And, that resonates with me. My husband is a prosthetist, so he makes artificial limbs, and his patients tend to have a different level of trust for him when they find out he's married to an amputee, because he has that lived experience of being around someone who is like his patients all the time. So I think those are all really great points. Thank you all for those responses. And I will turn it over to Damon for the next question.
Yes, this is Damon again, and actually, Stuart, you set me up for a perfect segue to our next question. During the last year, we've all witnessed the just huge inequity and imbalance in not only power but in privilege in this country. And organizationally, we're hearing and talking, and it seems like you can't go more than a day or two without having another diversity, equity, or inclusion training, opportunity, discussion, group. But I find myself always saying, what about the disability community? What about this? What about accessibility as part of these discussions? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. The idea of how do we not forget the disability community is actually the largest minority group in this country by far, just by sheer numbers. And I would just love some of your thoughts on that. And why don't we start with Andre for this one?
Well, we just heard in the news about the woman with dementia that was stopped by the police, and I think it is a disgrace. On the other hand, is it many times when one of my employees made a mistake at the beginning, I would take responsibility and said, well, I've not trained them on this. I didn't foresee this. I didn't prepare them for it. And I think that we're beginning to let the world know the importance of training and development and getting people out there that will be able to handle the situations that are different, and that you don't arrest a person in a wheelchair the same way that you arrest a person that is able-bodied. And similarly with issues like that lady the other day. So training, I think, is getting the people that are the experts on this coming out to help the police handle difficult situations in a more tactful, less forceful kind of way, I think is an imperative. Particularly, talk about people that are hard of hearing or really cannot follow the commands of a policeman, and how do you handle all those situations? So significant training has to take place. I hope that helps.
Thank you. When you mentioned someone in a wheelchair being arrested, I have this picture of Dawn Russell, who was arrested a couple years ago, and it's she went out screaming. Boy, she was something. But I think somebody was going to say something. Was that you, Julie?
Yeah, I think it's important when we have this discussion that we talk about people with disabilities of color. There's an Audre Lorde quote that says, there's no such thing as a single issue person because we don't have single issue lives. And so if we look at the data and we look at the employment numbers, 47% of, the unemployment rate of 70% mentioned earlier was kind of like full-time regular employment. But for any employment before COVID, it was only 47% of us were employed. But then if you look at Black people with disabilities, the number goes down to like 38%. If you look at education, Black children with disabilities lose 77 more days a year of school than white kids with disabilities who are already losing time from school, which no one should be. So when you think of 180 days of the year, of the school year, and Black kids are losing 77 more days a year, meaning it's over 77, that's a real problem. And if you look at things like the school to prison pipeline, if you look at, the horrible large number of unarmed Black people who have been shot, a majority of those are folks with disabilities. So it's the intersectionality that I think needs to be at the heart of this discussion. When we're talking about race, because there's disability oppression, absolutely. But white people with disabilities, someone like me, still has all that white privilege, whereas Black people and brown people with disabilities don't, and they also have the disability issue. So I think that intersectionality is really important. And I think as a disability community, we need to look at how our own movement and our own organizations have also perpetuated, white privilege and white supremacy, because you can't live in this society without having that wash over you. And so we need to make sure that we are addressing those things as well in our own community.
Yes, very well said. The word intersectionality just keeps coming up and keep coming up. And the old adage, if you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability, just keeps ringing true. And I think that that rings true across a wide spectrum of our society. And Chelsea, you want to chime in on this one?
I do. I just, hearing your comments, it makes me think of the MLK quote, you know, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so we have to choose to fight, you know, the specific battles. We can say, okay, we can look at this singular problem, or we can look at disability, race, oppression, sexism, you know, oppression of the LGBTQA community. And we have to fight all of those battles. It's not that we can only pick and choose one. I just don't think that that's how it works.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's a beautiful reminder. Stuart, you want to bring us home on this one?
Well, yeah. Well, I wanted to have you speak first because, yeah, our brother's been stressed. Yeah, this year, I've been Black all my life. I just sat down in this wheelchair in 1982. So that's when my disability, those intersectionalities of my worlds came together. It's been rough. This last year has awakened me to a lot of things, and that I was just a little bit of snooze button on. But, you know, carrying around or you having this uniform on as with Black skin it shouldn't be a burden. But sometimes it gets tired. Just for me, it gets tired. I'm tired of watching Black folks getting shot. That shit is getting on my damn nerves. I mean, every time I look, and I'm trying to be civil, I'm going to try to be civil. So I, as a Black man, have to deal with that first. I'm seeing people getting shot like it's a problem. And intersectionality, or combining it with disability. Oh yeah, to lighten it up. I'm very popular right now as far as being boards on commissions and everything else because everybody wants to be taught. I'm great with that because I'm going to take advantage of those positions that I have your attention. And if you change up your tone while I'm on your board, I'm going to let everybody know about it because you put me on there as a token. And I have a problem with that. If you do not listen to my problems while I'm on your boards or your commissions or my opinions, I'm going to have a problem with that because you asked me. Now I know you're tokenizing. So because I don't want to get little, I want to keep it classy. I'm just going to stay right there in that little happy spot.
Thank you all so much for your thoughts and your. Are there any other? I keep running into this idea that we're all in the same world together. How much division that we're all just faced with daily. And I was thinking back to what Andre was saying about the woman with dementia that was arrested in Boulder, and we haven't really even scratched the surface on, Julie mentioned mental health and how much we're seeing an increase in awareness of mental health issues after being on basic lockdown for a year, and just the numbers are truly staggering. So thank you all. Any last minute thoughts before I hand it back over to Emily for the home stretch?
I think the lockdown for folks that have disabilities has been, we're up on you. At least I've figured out that I've been in that situation before. I've been isolated. It was funny because I remember when the pandemic first came out, or first started, I should say, and people were saying, well, this is a time where you need to look inward. I've been looking inward for 40 years now. I didn't need, I didn't need any more introspection. So I think I know who I am, but I did find out more things about myself as far as the folks that are in my community, both communities. So as the saying says, and I hope it doesn't become a cliche, but we do have a lot more work to do. And we need accomplices. We don't need allies. I need somebody to get their hands dirty.
All right. Thank you.
All right, I have the final question here. So talking about terminology and language and the words that we use, you know, I introduced myself in the beginning as a person with a disability, but also as an amputee. So I used both person first and identity first language just in speaking about myself. So, you know, every community has their own language. Can you all talk to us about how do we better understand the use of language, and what advice would you offer to people when they're talking to people with disabilities, to disabled people, or about disabilities? And we will start with Chelsea.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing in our community, using the word deaf or hard of hearing, being mindful of those terms. The term hearing impaired is something that really turns, it turns me off. It's not an impairment. It's not something that I can't do. Or deaf mute is, I can communicate just fine, but it's not in that typical way of communicating, or universally understood. So deaf or hard of hearing is something I always like to let people know, and always asking people what they identify as. Just ask them first, how do you prefer to be called? Deaf, hard of hearing? And maybe somebody will say, hey, call me hearing impaired, and that's totally their prerogative, but always asking what you identify, and then asking what accommodations are necessary. So I think that that's important.
Yeah, very good point. I used to have a coworker who would say, we label jars, not people. That was always her response. And she would say, you can identify me as, and she would say her name. And that's how she wanted to be identified. So I really liked that insight. Thank you, Chelsea. Let's go to Andre.
So I am a speaker that happens to be blind, right? And not the other way around, not a blind speaker. And and again, blindness, visually impaired, I would consider myself more visually impaired than I'm blind, because I think there is an enormous difference between of perception of light. At least I know where the door is or the window is, and which is tremendously helpful. But another thing that we used to have stewardesses and other flight attendants and secretaries and administrative assistant. And we used to have handicapped, and that H word is now a hated word, and we don't like it, and we're not handicapped. And so it's not a handicapped space, it's an accessible space. And so we would like to see the language change significantly around the word.
No, really, really great points. And, just from the first two responses, we've heard, very different ways of identifying ourselves. And like I mentioned, I use both ways in the very beginning. So I think it's a complex issue, just deciding what language we use and, how we use that language. And I was going to go to Stuart, but I don't see him now.
Oh, crap.
We'll go to Julie. Let's go to Julie, and then we'll come back to Stuart.
So this discussion is a great example of why you need to listen to people, and people have a right to define themselves and who they are. I get asked this question all the time when I do trainings, and I think what I tell non-disabled audiences is person first is what you should do right now, but it's changing, and more of us, and I'm one of them, are adopting identity first language. And and I think that the reason is, and it's something that we've learned from our deaf brothers and sisters and our autistic brothers and sisters, is to be proud, is that language uses comes with pride. And so by calling ourselves disabled is to say there's nothing wrong with having a disability, and that it is a part of our identity and something that we're proud of. And people, I say, well, what is disability pride? Are you proud that you went and got a disability? Because most of us either were born with a disability or didn't intentionally do whatever, we did to get a disability. so the pride is not in the fact that we have a disability. It's about our incredible community and the resiliency that we see in our community and the creativity that we see in our community. So that's where that identity first language comes in for me. And the one thing that I would say not to do with language is to use euphemisms. I like when people talk about like differently abled. That's I find that really offensive. And in those kind of words, because it's like saying the word disability is a bad word, and it's not a bad word. It's a good word. It's a positive word. Disability, disabled. We have an incredible community and have contributed a lot to our world. So I see no shame in using the word, but person first is probably what a reporter should use or what outsiders should use at this point, because we're in a transition. And sometimes people ask me, well, if I learn the right word now, can you promise me it won't change? And I say, no, I can promise you it will change, because language evolves. All language evolves. I mean, we didn't know the word BIPOC until this year, the acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. That's something that's popped up in the past year. And that's something that those communities came up with. And so it's not hard, or like we didn't used to use pronouns. And a lot of people are doing that now. When someone says, this is how I want to be referred to, it's not hard for the rest of us to just do that and refer to them in the way that they ask. It's
Yeah.
an easy thing to do to create a community of belonging for everyone.
I think that's really important, creating the space for people to direct you as to how they want to engage in the conversation with you. I also think it's really interesting, this change from person first to identity first, and that evolution, and kind of reclaiming the word disabled and really saying it's not a bad word, it's just part of who I am disabled. So I think that's all, just very interesting. One of the things that comes to my mind, I've always identified as an amputee, but I have a friend who was born without her arm and her leg. And so she says, but I'm not an amputee, I was just born this way. So I'm a person with limb loss. So, even within, a tiny community, we just have different ways and different preferences. And I think what I'm hearing is that we need to listen to each person and engage with them in the way that they have identified as being appropriate. So Stuart, we'll go to you for any final thoughts on the use of language, and we'll be interested to hear what you think.
Yes, I apologize. I thought I had everything muted and turned off. A phone call got through. No, I just identify as just Stuart, the Black guy in the wheelchair. That means everything to me and nothing to anybody else, because I don't, how you perceive me doesn't matter. How I perceive myself is something different. Now, with that being said, I do know the power and the value of words and identity. Now, to somebody who just got injured and it was over, that has unfortunately been admitted to Craig Hospital maybe this week, they have to establish who they are in this world. So they're going to need the Julie Riskins in the world to help them to identify with their advocacy, where their power is. They're going to need the Andres in life. They're going to need the Chelseas in life to know where these role models of who. So I can't be the Black guy in the wheelchair. I can be the Black guy in the wheelchair here inside my head and everything else. But out in the world, I am Stuart Chuckerlundy. And if you want to know more about me, you can, and you will find out that I have a disability. But that's something I don't lead with it. You know it, you'll know it. But it is a part of my identity, but it's not a part of my identity that I lead with. I understand why somebody would want to, because you want to be seen. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be special. But I think that, like I said, folks like Julie, who I've learned a lot from, help you. If anything, she's a guidance counselor for folks in wheelchairs, or folks with disabilities. At least she has been to me. At least I've seen the work she does as far as putting people out into the world or getting people established with their identity. and who they are going to be, and as productive members of society, if society lets us be productive members.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really think those are all really insightful comments and appreciate what everyone has had to share today. I think that we have time to maybe give everyone about 30 seconds. If you have any final thoughts that you feel are very important to share with our audience that you didn't get a chance to touch on today, we'll give you 30 seconds to just to share that message, and we will start with Andre.
I'm a native of Argentina, and when I knew nothing about disability, I went to visit my mom, and she was living in an apartment and she was in a wheelchair. And I said, Mom, I'm going to take you out for a walk. And I took the elevator down, and I found I could not get the wheelchair to the street due to steps. And I had to ask help from another resident. And then we got to the street, and the sidewalk was all broken up, and it was impossible. And the street was cobblestone, so I had to turn around in defeat. So I'm so grateful for ADA and what it has done for us in this country. And we're far advanced. And so today we spoke about what is missing, but I think it's important to recognize the enormous progress that ADA has meant for many of us.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thank you. All right, 30 seconds, Stuart.
Oh, guys, you're gonna give me 30 seconds. Okay, I'll try to do it. I think that, like Andre said, I think the ADA has done a lot. And the people on the front lines, the Gang of 13, the folks who strapped themselves to buses and made it known that we were here. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of those folks, because it was so important. And like I said earlier, I did not know I needed the ADA. And now that I know that it's around, and I know it's a little bit in shambles, I want to help fix it. And I need your help. We need your help. Like I said earlier, we don't need allies. I need accomplices. I need somebody who's going to get their hands dirty, who's going to bail me out of jail, who's going to bail us out of jail, who is going to be sitting me next to me while we're in jail. So I think that, like I said, the work that has been done needs to be built on and be expanded.
All
That's
right.
my 2 cents.
Accomplices, not allies. We're going to get shirts with that on it. All right, Chelsea, any final thoughts in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I think, talking about allyship and having that, and also, folks that are able-bodied, just looking inwards and thinking, what kind of privilege do you innately have? What kind of things, how can you use that to your advantage and that power to provide access to others? Like, for example, captioning your videos. Many people think, oh, it's good enough. I'm going to post the video without captions. It's no big deal. But it's really a simple thing to add captions, and it's an act of allyship to the entire community. So there's just different things you can do to make the world easier and more accessible place for all.
That's a really, really good point. I often see videos with the auto captions that do not accurately reflect what is actually being said. So I think accurate captions is very important.
Right.
All right. Julie, you want to bring us home with 30 seconds of wisdom that you would like to share?
I think Stuart said it best. The ADA is a great law. It's brought us far, but we've got a lot more to go. And I think that we owe it to our younger generation to be more than, living in the community is great. But we need more now. We need people to have jobs, to have income equality, to feel that they can, get married to whomever they want, build a life like everyone else. So, and we need full communication access on the digital and all spaces. So I think those, again, employment and communication are the next big frontiers, but we need to build on it, and we need to, be united and fight against any efforts to weaken the ADA.
Well, thank you all for being here today for this super engaging conversation. I know that I really enjoyed engaging in this discussion with you all. I love when we can get a room full of people with disabilities or disabled people together to talk through these really important issues. Thank you to the C Film Center, which I am in. This is not a fake background. This is a real chair in the theater. And thank you to I Am Denver for highlighting the 30th anniversary of the ADA.